I'm done with Miles Sanders in Dynasty. I want nothing to do with him at his current costs, in his current situation. Just nope, don't want him. I'm done. And honestly, this does hurt me inside because Sanders is a Penn Stater, but I'm done buying back in every single year only for him to fall short of expectations. He did it in 2020 after finishing his rookie 2019 season as the RB15. The hype was there for a breakout second season that ultimately fell short based on a handful of missed games, a bad offense with limited touchdown opportunities, a near 50% drop in receptions and receiving workload, and just overall inconsistency in his own volume throughout the season. But he finished the season strong with Jalen Hurts. He finished as the RB3, RB30, and RB11 during the 3 weeks of the fantasy playoffs, so maybe there's hope yet for 2021. Nope. Instead of committing more to Sanders, they actually drafted Kenneth Gainwell in the 2021 draft, which led to even more inconsistency in Sanders' workload on top of missing another month of football due to injuries. He had 5 games with under 10 rush attempts, 6 games with 2 or fewer receptions, and finished as a top 24 back only 4 times last year, just a third of his games played. But what saves the day again are 2 back-to-back weeks of 142 and 146 total yards in weeks 13 and 15. Again, right around the fantasy playoffs, he starts producing for us. That little heartbeat of life is what's kept Miles Sanders' dynasty value afloat all offseason on the hope that 2022 can be the year that he puts it all together. Well, I'm not buying it.
You know what they say, fool me once, strike one, but fool me twice, strike 3.
Based on their moves this offseason, I would imagine that the Eagles want to throw more, or at least throw more effectively, after adding A.J. Brown and even signing Zach Pascal, who I honestly think is probably better than Jalen Reagor as the team's wide receiver 3. Kenneth Gainwell is also still there to steal receiving work, so Sanders is really just a 2-down guy who might see 3 to 4 receptions a game every once in a while, and that limited receiving work really caps his upside. Not to mention Sanders' total ineffectiveness in the red zone, not only losing touches to Jalen Hurts, but also being out-touched by both Jordan Howard and Boston Scott inside the 10 and 5 yard line last year. In fact, his 10 rush attempts inside the 10 was the same number on the season last year as Jamal Williams, and only one more than both Ronald Jones and Tevin Coleman. In fact, I think y'all would be shocked to find out that Miles Sanders and Jamal Williams had almost the same production in 2021 last year. So what we have is a running back who isn't the receiving back on his team, isn't the goal line back on his team, and has missed a handful of games in each of the past 2 seasons. No, I don't want that. I'm good. In June Dynasty ADP, he was going as the RB29, which might seem low to people until you look at some of the players behind him, like Tony Pollard, Kareem Hunt, Devin Singletary, and honestly even Ramondre Stevenson are all guys that I would rather have than Miles Sanders, all going behind him in ADP right now. Looking at the DLF Trade Finder, you have Miles Sanders for both Patriots running backs, Sanders, Sony Michel, and a second for a 23 first, Sanders and Gainwell for Antonio Gibson, and Sanders in the 112 and 201 for Devin Singletary and a 23 first and second. These are easy trades to move off of Sanders, and I'm cashing out now before we see him play in 2022 and disappoint us yet again. Because if he does, his dynasty value may never recover from that. The next guy I'm done with is Mike Williams, which to a lot of people might sound ridiculous after the season that he just had in 2021, but it was not as fantastic as you might remember it to be. Yes, he posted 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns on 76 receptions, a career year for Mike Williams. But 40% of that total season production came in the first 5 weeks, and from week 6 on, Williams was the wide receiver 29, averaging 11.9 fantasy points per game. The only explanation I can try to provide for this is that Herbert just decided to spread the ball around more, or maybe defenses at that point were more honed in on Mike Williams than before. I can't really blame this on Keenan Allen because while he was the wide receiver 12 from week 6 on, he was still the wide receiver 18 over the first 5 weeks when Mike Williams was going off, averaging over 10 targets a game himself. So this isn't really Keenan Allen's fault. Overall, what I think it is that it just shows that Mike Williams really is the wide receiver 2 on this team, and Keenan Allen is the wide receiver 1, as much as we might think or want it to be the other way. Keenan is still the wide receiver 1. The issue though is that there are a lot of people out there who believe Mike Williams is the wide receiver 1 of the team and view his season last year at face value. Curtis Patrick actually posted this poll on Twitter asking which receiver you would prefer for this year only, and to me the fact that this is even a conversation is insane. Williams is dead last among these 3 players for me in my rankings for 2022, and honestly, I don't even think he should be considered next to the other 3. Even worse, the fact that Williams is ahead of Hollywood Brown in this poll is also insane to me. This redraft valuation on Mike Williams is also spilling over into Dynasty, where people are paying 2023 first to acquire Mike Williams. Again, also insane to me. I'd be willing to add up to a second with Mike Williams for a 2023 first, like these trades here, or depending on your league, you could get a 2023 first plus for Mike Williams if people are willing to pay for that. Or you can move him for a quality RB2 with upside, like these 2 trades here for ETN and J.K. Dobbins. In June ADP, I'm surprised he's only wide receiver 33 based on his trade value and redraft height. But even there, I'd be willing to take a handful of guys going behind him ahead of him, like Juju Smith-Schuster, who's already way better fantasy career already and is still 2 years younger. You got Brandon Cooks, who's just a perennial top 20 guy. I'd take Sky Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gabe Davis, who is essentially on path to be Mike Williams in the Bills offense. And then also Allen Robinson, the wide receiver 2, for an elite quarterback with better historical production. Once we get to Brandon Ayuk in these rankings is where things get trickier. But just right there, out of those names that I've said I'd rather have than Williams, I've dropped him 7 spots in wide receiver ADP and nearly a full round of startup value. He's a spike week player attached to an elite quarterback, but that's an ability that you can find at much cheaper prices and possibly even younger because this is Dynasty, rather than a soon-to-be 28-year-old with only 1 top 30 finish at the position. The final player that I'm done with in Dynasty is Aaron Rodgers, because I'm done dealing with what feels like extra unnecessary nonsense off the field on top of where I believe the Packers are heading to on the field for fantasy football. As we all know, the Packers have traded away Davante Adams, leaving Rodgers with the absolute worst receiving core he has ever had in his career, with the next closest probably being 2015 when Jordy Nelson tore his ACL before the season, and they only had Randall Cobb and a second-year Davante Adams, who wasn't Davante Adams yet. In that season, Rodgers threw for only 3,800 yards and 31 touchdowns, finishing as the QB9 on the year. But that was 2015 QB9, which would have actually been QB12 in 2021 scoring, and that's without a healthy Lamar Jackson or Russell Wilson, so he could have been the QB14, scoring similarly to guys like Ryan Tannehill and Derek Carr. A QB12 finish would be the worst finish Rodgers has ever had in his career as a starter playing an entire season. Then, like I said, it could have been even worse if other players from last year had just stayed healthy. It could also get worse if Rodgers doesn't top 30 touchdowns like he did in 2015, which I also don't think is unrealistic since he didn't break 30 in both 2018 and 2019. So if Rodgers were to replicate his 2015 with this bad receiving core in 2021, but then you take away 5 touchdowns, he would have been QB 14 in 2021, still barely ahead of Lamar and Russ, so could have easily have just been QB 16, essentially scoring the same as Carson Wentz. This is the fear that I have with Rodgers' fantasy production as we reach the end of his NFL career. I don't have much faith in this receiving core, and I don't actually think that any of them pan out for fantasy football. I've made it very clear on this channel that I think Christian Watson's a bust. I like Allen Lazard, but he's not an alpha wide receiver. Sammy Watkins is Sammy Watkins. We know who he is. And then you just have Robert Tonyan in the running backs. There's a world where none of these guys break 1,000 yards or even possibly 800 yards if they all miss a game or two here and there throughout the season. That all is going to hurt Rodgers, who I already think has 1 foot out the door and is just fine collecting paychecks and not getting hurt for another year or two. But even if he does have an Aaron Rodgers top 5 fantasy season this year, then we're just repeating the same offseason cycle that we've had the last couple of years, and I just don't want to deal with that by having him on my Dynasty roster. And this is Dynasty, right? So it's better to sell a year early than a year too late. In fact, in one of my leagues, I actually sold Rodgers for a 2023 first and second, and I was happy to do that just to be done and get rid of Aaron Rodgers on my team. And if you want 2 more players that Justin is done with in Dynasty at their current cost, you can click on this video right up here and watch that.